What's up, everybody? Welcome to System Crafters. I'm David Wilson, and today we're going to talk about efficient movement with Emacs key bindings. So in the previous episode, we basically did the absolute beginner's guide to Emacs, where we showed the basic usage of Emacs and how you can just get started using it. But the thing is, we didn't really get much time to talk about the actual movement keys inside of text buffers in depth. So in this episode, what we're going to talk about is how you can learn how to use the inbuilt Emacs key bindings to make your day-to-day workflow and movement around in buffers much more efficient. So what we're also going to see is how you can do this movement without having to move your fingers from the letter keys. So typically in editors, you end up using the arrow keys, home, end, page up, page down, all these different keys that are meant for movement, but they take your hand away from the home row on the keyboard. So the nice thing about the inbuilt Emacs key bindings for movement is that they keep your hands where that you are on the letter keys so that you can move around much more efficiently without having to move your hands around. So I'm also going to tell you about the exact Emacs commands that all of these keys bind to, so that if you decide that you don't like the actual default key bindings, you could go change them if you wanted to. So you know what the commands they bind to, and then you can just go change the keys for those. We'll talk about customization of keys in another video, so don't worry too much about that right now. Also, the really cool thing about this is that these same commands that you use for movement around in buffers can also be used in Emacs Lisp code. So once you finally get to the point where you're comfortable enough in Emacs and you want to start writing your own Emacs Lisp code to automate some task or maybe make your own package, you could use these exact same commands for moving around in the buffer, any buffer that the user has open. So it's a really cool thing to learn these commands also. So while you go through this video, I definitely recommend having Emacs open, maybe open a source code file or maybe like an org mode file, and try these key bindings while I show them to you so that you have a chance to learn them and figure out how you might work them into your own workflow day to day. All right, so first of all, the most important thing to know is about the point. So in Emacs, the term point refers to the location of the cursor in a given buffer. So this is the place where whenever you start typing, text is going to be inserted. Also, it's the location that will be changed using the movement keys. So basically, when you want to move around the buffer, what you're using is commands that move the point in the buffer. So basically moving the cursor position. So if I were to use my own key bindings here to move the cursor around, basically this is the location of the point. And anywhere I put the cursor, like let's say on this T, once I start typing text, it's going to insert it right in front of that T. So that's the point. So Emacs allows you to use the arrow keys and the home end keys, page up, page down keys, all those same keys you would normally use in traditional text editors to move around in a buffer. However, in addition to those keys, Emacs also provides a set of movement keys using alphabetical letters that are where your hands already are on the keyboard as you've been typing. The interesting thing is that these keys are chosen because of the words that they map to, so that they're easier to remember. So this is that concept of mnemonic key bindings, where the name of the action or the key corresponds to what you would think of whenever you want to do the action, basically. So in this case, what we'll see is that there are a few different letters and words that are used commonly through these commands to help you remember them, basically. The letter F typically stands for forward, so you'll see in just a second that's a very core key binding. Also, B stands for backward, N stands for next, and P stands for previous. So this just shows you that the reason why these particular keys are chosen is because of how you might think of the action that you want to do for operating on text or moving around in a buffer. The other interesting thing is that these letters are pretty core to other parts of the Emacs UI as well. So if you use Control-N, Control-P for moving between lines, those also work whenever you're moving in selection lists a lot of the time. So these things are very central to the way that you use Emacs, so that you don't have to use arrow keys. You can basically just use these movement keys anywhere, not just in a text buffer, but in other user interface elements as well. And through all these sections, I'm going to be including links to the Emacs manual, so you can go look at those for more information. So definitely check out these links if you want more info. All right, so the basic movements in Emacs. So the basic point movements are done using the keys that I mentioned above in combination with the control key. So control F executes the forward care command, which moves the point forward by 1 character, and control B executes backward care, which moves the point backward by 1 character. So I'm gonna go jump over to a demonstration Emacs. Let me actually just kill my panel really quickly. And what we're going to see is basically a vanilla Emacs configuration with no customization except for just very little stuff necessary to make it possible to do this video. And I'm going to show you using these key bindings in practice. So I'm just going to use my mouse to cheat for a second. I'm going to put my point right here. You can see this yellow blinking area is where the point currently is. So I'm going to use Control F, and I'm going to press Control F a few times, and you're going to see that the cursor, the point moves forward. And then when I press Control B, it moves backward. So that's basically this idea of moving forward and backward. Now, if you keep pressing Control F, or maybe you hold it down, it will eventually wrap around to the next line. So you can use that to go between lines, but that's not really the most efficient way to do it. We'll talk about that in just 1 second. I also want to point out one thing to you. If you look down in the mode line area here at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the keys that I'm pressing and the command that they map to. Also, you'll see how many times in sequence I press them, but that's not really as important as the key binding and the command name. This is coming from the KeyCast package, which is a really excellent package in case you want to show anybody what keys you're pressing while you're using Emacs. So now let's talk about the keys for moving to the next and previous line. So as we mentioned before, the N and P letters correspond to next and previous respectively. In this case, Control N executes the next line command, which moves the point forward by 1 line, and it also keeps the horizontal position. So if you have 3 lines of text and they're all about the same length, if you press Control N, it will keep the cursor position in the horizontal location on that line. Same thing for Control P, it calls the previous line command, which moves backward by 1 line. So if we jump back to our demo Emacs, I can press Control N to move down lines, and then Control P to move back up to the previous line. So the benefit of these bindings is they're closer to where your fingers are on the keyboard already, and you don't have to move your hand to the arrow keys basically to move around using those same arrows basically. You can just use the characters on the keyboard. Now, maybe you think that these positions are not really so oriented towards a direction where you're moving, which I kind of agree. I think that the back and forward and the next and previous keys, they don't really map to my own sort of mental model of up and down, but really just about any key binding set you use, like whether it's Emacs key bindings or Vim key bindings, you're gonna have to have some kind of mapping in your head anyway. So it's just a matter of getting used to it as you move forward. So one other thing I want to mention is that the Control F and Control B characters or key bindings, they do move the point position forward and backward, but they do not respect whether you have right to left text installed. So if you're using a language that uses right to left, like Arabic script maybe, I believe that the left and right arrow keys actually do support the proper direction movement for left and right, but Control F and Control B do not. If anybody out there knows more about this than I do, please feel free to leave a note in the comments, because I don't use right to left text, so I don't really have as much familiarity with the differences between the key bindings for that, but it is something to note if it does matter to you. All right, so now let's talk about moving to the beginning and the end of the line. Very common operation, something you'll do all day long. I know I definitely do that. So the Control A key executes move beginning of line, which moves the point to the beginning of the line, and Control E executes move end of line, which moves the point to the end of line. So these function or the command names are very clear about what they do, and the bindings here actually do have some mnemonic value in that the A kind of stands for the beginning of the English alphabet, like A, B, C, D, E. So if you know that the English alphabet starts in A, then you can think of A as the beginning. And then E stands for end. So Control A and then Control E. So if we jump to our demo Emacs here, I can use, let's move down 1 line, and then maybe, yeah, right here we're in a good position. We're toward the end of the line. If I press Control A, it's gonna jump me to the beginning of the line. And if I use Control E, it will jump me to the end of the line. And I think that, yeah, if you press Control A, Control E, they basically, yeah, they don't, there's no function for repeating those. They basically just go to the end and they just stay there. So that's kind of nice. If I use Control N and then Control E, I can go to the end of that next line. And then I can use Control A to go to the beginning of this line. Let's see, does it actually do anything about indentation? Yeah, Control A, if you keep pressing it, it doesn't jump to the beginning of the indentation of the line. Maybe there's some setting you can use to make that happen though. Let's see, what else? Moving to the beginning and end of a buffer. Also something you might want to do in case maybe you want to insert a heading at the top of a file, or maybe you want to continue editing at the bottom of the buffer. Maybe you're writing a document and you need to continue where you left off at the end. You can use the Alt and angle bracket keys to move to the beginning and the end of the buffer. So Alt, so remember the M from the previous episode, we talked about basic key binding information. M stands for meta, which really is a synonym for Alt. So this is Alt and the left angle bracket character pressed at the same time. That executes beginning of buffer, and that moves the point to the beginning of the buffer. If you use Alt and the close angle bracket character, that executes end of buffer, which moves to the end of the buffer. So let me just pull that up one more time. So I'm going to use Alt and left angle bracket, and that immediately moves the character to the beginning of this file. If I use Alt and then the right angle bracket, then it puts me at the very end of the file. So it's very easy to jump back and forth between those, and then you can use the Control NP characters to then move across the lines in the file that way. So if you're using the GUI version of Emacs, which is probably most of you, basically what I mean by GUI is the graphical application that you can launch in your operating system and desktop environment of choice, not the terminal version. You can also press Control Home and Control N to accomplish the same thing. I think the reason why this doesn't work in the terminal is because those keys are used for something else and they don't go to Emacs. So if we jump back here, press Control Home, it also jumps to the beginning. Control End also jumps to the end. I wonder if it also sets the mark. Maybe that's one thing that's a little bit different about that. Let's see. Yeah, it sets the mark in either case, so that doesn't really matter. Okay, so the next thing, moving to a specific line or column. So if you use compilers and the compiler gives you an error about something in your code, often it's going to tell you which line or column that the error shows up on, maybe if it's a syntax error or something like that. There are key bindings you can use to jump to the line and column pretty easily. The most important one is jumping to a line, which is Alt-G, Alt-G. So basically you press Alt-G twice in a row, and you can hold Alt the whole time. Just press Alt-G-G basically. That executes the go-to-line command, which prompts you for the line number in the echo area. So if I were to say, actually, let me jump down here really quick to see what line number this is. Oh, actually, I don't have anything in my mode line to tell me. That's interesting. So I'm going to show you a little trick. So if you use Meta X to pull up the command list, you can type in display line numbers mode and press enter, and that will give you a line number display on the left-hand side of the buffer. You're probably going to want that in most cases. There's also, I think, global display line number mode. Yeah, global display line numbers mode. Display line numbers mode. There we go. So you can turn it on for all buffers, basically. So the reason why I tell you that is so that you can see the line numbers here when we do these jumping around. The other thing is I'll show you how to set up your configuration to always turn that on or only turn it on for certain types of buffers. We'll just get to that in another video when we start talking about configuration in Emacs. So right now, my cursor is on line number 8. And what if I want to jump to line number 33? I'm going to press Alt-G, Alt-G, and then that's going to pull up this go-to line prompt in the echo area, and I can type in line 33, press enter, and then my cursor will be jumped to line 33. There's also the Alt-G and then tab binding, so you press Alt-G, then release Alt, then press tab, and then that calls the move to column function or command, which prompts you for the column number to jump to. So in this case, let's say we want to jump to maybe column number 15, because I think there's probably 15 characters in this line. So I'll use Alt-G, then tab, then it asks me for what column. I'll press 15, press enter, and then it jumps me to the 15th character in that line. So those can be very useful if you do need to jump to a specific location, especially jumping to specific lines, because that comes up very frequently in programming, but maybe also for document editing as well. And like I mentioned, you can easily show the line numbers in a buffer by running the display line numbers mode command. Okay, so now There's other bindings that will move you to larger units in a buffer, or move by larger units in a buffer, usually corresponding to units that you understand, like words, sentences, and paragraphs. So this is where some more of the efficiency of movement comes into play, because you don't have to move by individual character positions anymore. You can move by things like words. So if you want to move forward and backward by words, basically using the same keys that we talked about before, where we used Control F, Control B, now you can use Alt F and Alt B to move by word. So Alt F is executes forward word, which moves forward by one word, and then Alt B executes backward word to move the point backward by one word. The interesting thing to note about these two is when you use Alt F, if your cursor is currently in a word, it will just move to the end of the word, I believe. And then if you press it again, it will move to the end of the next word. To contrast that with the backward word command, which moves to the beginning of the word, and then it will move to the beginning of the previous word. So basically, these are trying to move to the end in the case of forward and the beginning in the case of backward. So let's show how those work here. So let's see. I'm on, let me move up to maybe this line right here. Sometimes I might try to type Vim key bindings because I typically use Vim key bindings. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to have my cursor inside of this word. I'm going to press Alt F to go forward, and it goes to the end of this word. So if I start typing letters, it's going to add letters to the very end of that word. So that shows you that the cursor gets placed at the very end of that word. If I press Alt F again, it moves to the end of the next word. If I press Alt F again, it actually jumps to the next word. It skips all punctuation and white space. So it's looking for actual words and not any punctuation. So this can be helpful if you are writing a document or maybe writing code and you want to get to the actual words inside of your code. If I keep pressing Alt F, it skips anything that is not a word, and then it gets down to any other words. So it could be very useful if you want to change a function name. Maybe you can use Alt F, Alt B to get to where you want to be in your code, so you don't have to just move the cursor around to that location. Also, we mentioned Alt B goes backwards, so I can just do the same thing to move backwards in words. And this is a lot faster than just doing letter by letter. So these are very useful to use on a day-to-day basis, I think. Note that there's no equivalent here to Control N and Control P for next line, previous line. So Alt N and Alt P don't actually do anything. If I go in here and press Alt N, it's undefined. Alt P is also undefined. So if you decided you want to use those key bindings, you could probably set them to something else. Also, paragraphs. So paragraphs basically are treated as any block of some text that is delimited by white space. So you can use the Alt and right curly brace character to execute forward paragraph to move forward, the point forward by one paragraph, and then the Alt and left curly brace character to move backward by one paragraph. And as I mentioned, these keys can be used in code because the definition of a paragraph is any section of text that's separated by blank lines. So it could be a paragraph in normal prose, or it can also just be like a function that has a blank line before and after. So let's take a look at that really quickly. So if I'm in this paragraph here, let's consider this a paragraph, this whole defun. If I use Alt and right curly brace, it's going to jump down to that next blank space below that. And then I can keep pressing it, and it's going to jump basically anywhere there's a gap in between these blocks of code. Let's see. Yeah, so here's one good point that you can see where we have one whole expression here. This use package expression starts, and there's a gap while the expression is still open. So this indentation shows you that we're still inside of this use package expression. But if I use this forward paragraph, it's going to drop me to this blank line in between. So this paragraph functionality doesn't really have any knowledge of the structure of what you're editing. It's basically just looking for these blank lines in between sections of text in your code. However, oftentimes you're going to have blank lines all over the place, whether it's prose or in code. So it's a very effective way to jump around quickly between sections of your file. So if I use the Alt left curly brace character, which is basically Alt Shift and left curly brace on the US English keyboards. So I can move pretty quickly between sections of the file, and I don't have to, individually hold like the Control N character to just like sort of scroll down. I can move much more quickly that way. So it's pretty useful for that, I think. So if you want to check out the rules used to decide what's a paragraph, you can check out the documentation for the paragraph start variable. If you remember what we talked about before, if you use Control-H-V to pull up the documentation for paragraph start, and then they've got some documentation here basically to describe what the heuristics are for deciding what is a paragraph. And you can see here that there's kind of a lot of regular expressions that are being used for this case, either in org mode files or in just normal text files. So you might need to learn a little bit about regular expressions before you really know how to change this if you want to, but it's there if you are interested in learning more. All right, so sentences. You can move between sentences in actual prose using keys similar to jumping to beginning or end of line. So as we saw before, Control-A and Control-E moves to the beginning of the line, Control-E moves to the end of the line. Now we have Alt-E, which calls forward sentence, which moves a point forward to the end of the current sentence or to the end of the following sentence. Alt-A also calls backward sentence to move the point backward to the beginning of the current sentence or to the preceding sentence. Now, this is what qualifies as a sentence in this case is a bit more complex. You should definitely check out the documentation for the sentence end function. So use Control-HF on the sentence end function to get the information on that. There's a few different variables that it looks at. But basically, it's looking for actual sentences and not just, arbitrary text in code. However, if it doesn't find a normal sentence pattern, it's going to default to using the paragraph boundaries. So it will operate like it is moving to paragraphs instead. And that actually can be somewhat useful in code because these key bindings are easier to hit, in my opinion, than the ones with the curly braces. So maybe you'll use that instead in code. So if we jump over to our demo Emacs here, I can press Alt-A to go backwards. And this actually seems to be jumping to the beginning of expressions, which is kind of useful if you think about it, because sometimes you do want to just go to the beginning of an expression rather than the blank space in between them. So Control-A, 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 and then I can also use Control-E to go forward sentence, which basically puts me at the end of what is considered the paragraph text. So this is probably more useful than the paragraph movement that we saw before. Let me actually pull up a document that has, let's see, beginners, is that here? I'm gonna try to pull up a document that has text in it so we can look at how it works in practice for the real sentences. I'm trying to look for a document that I know has actual text in it. Okay, so Emacs Lisp, let's say 05 or 04. Yeah, let's try that. Okay, so there are sentences here. Let's see if we can find a line that has two sentences. All right, this one is a good one here. So what we're going to do is place our cursor here with a mouse. Then I'm going to use Alt-A to go to the beginning of the sentence, Alt-E to go to the end, Alt-E again to go to the end of this sentence. So if you're editing prose or documentation or writing a blog post or anything, this can be very easy, or make it very easy for you to insert sentences or insert any text into something that you've already written. So Control-A, Control-A. It basically just puts you at the beginning or end of whatever you've already written in terms of sentences, which can be pretty useful for moving around in that level of granularity inside of your document. So this could be pretty useful as well, I think, when you're editing text. Now, if we were to use the Alt curly brace keys for paragraphs, I mean, it still is useful, but it doesn't give us that level of granularity where we might, oh, actually, I should say the paragraph movement in org mode files is actually going to put you between headings, I think. So that is something to keep in mind as well. So sometimes these bindings change depending on which buffer type you're in, and an org mode buffer like this will be different. I'm going to change this to text mode just to defeat that. So now I'm using the normal paragraph keys, and they're doing exactly what we expect them to. And also, if I go down to that same sentence again, if I use Alt-E, it still does the same sentence behavior. So basically, sometimes these key bindings I'm telling you about, depending on the type of buffer you're in, they may do something different. So just keep that in mind. You might want to try using this keycast package that I told you about to see what command is being pressed or what command is being executed when you press a particular key, just so that you know. All right. So let's talk about scrolling the window. So obviously moving the cursor around is pretty important, but you're also going to want to scroll the window as well. Typically, you're going to press page up and page down to do that, and you can still do that in Emacs, but I think it's more efficient if you use the Control-V and Alt-V key bindings for scrolling up and down. So Control V executes the scroll up command to move the window to the next page of content in the buffer. So basically, scroll up command actually scrolls down, which is completely backwards to what you might think, but I'll tell you why. Also, Alt V executes the scroll down command, which basically makes you scroll up in the buffer. So it moves to the previous page of content. So the reason why they have this reversed up-down terminology, or at least the reason why I think they do, is because it's a more literal description of what the contents of the buffer are doing on the screen. So when you scroll the buffer contents up, you're moving down in the file. Basically, what you're looking at is lower in the file because you've basically pushed all those contents up. And then whenever you execute scroll down, you're pushing the contents down, which means you see the things that are above that. So the terminology is backward to what you might think of as scroll up and scroll down. So just keep that in mind whenever you're learning about these commands. Okay, so I can use Control V in this buffer to scroll down. So you can see the line numbers here are increasing as I use Control V over and over. And then Alt V to scroll back up. And I believe what's happening here is when I use Control V, the cursor will stay toward the top of the buffer because it basically tries to keep the point on the screen, but it's going to keep it as close to the text that you were seeing before as possible. So it locks it to the top. And then when you scroll up, the cursor will gradually go to the bottom of the screen because it's sort of dragging the cursor up as you scroll up. Or I guess it's dragging it up, but it's keeping it at the bottom of the screen. All right, so that's a little bit confusing, but at least the key bindings are easy to use, and you don't have to think about it too much whenever you get used to pressing those. Also, centering the window. Centering can be pretty useful to move the scroll position with respect to where the point currently is on the screen. So it can allow you to get more context about the code that you're currently looking at or whatever text you're currently looking at in the buffer. So the Control L binding executes the recenter top bottom command, which scrolls the buffer so that the line where the point is positioned it appears in the center of the window. So let's take a look right here. I'm going to put the point right here on this line number 70. If I press Control L, it's going to scroll the screen so that line 70 is in the center of the screen. And this can be useful if you kind of want to see the context around a particular line. However, maybe what you want to see is everything that comes after that line, and you want to scroll things so that this line shows up at the top of the window. If you continue pressing Control L, it will cycle that scroll position to center, and then top, and then bottom. So let's show that one more time. I'm going to scroll a little bit, and I'll put my mouse back on line 70. Scroll a little bit here with a mouse. All right, so I'm going to press Control L the first time. It's going to center it. I press it the second time, then it's going to move that same line or scroll that same line to the top of the screen so we see everything that comes after it, which might be useful if you're writing code and looking at a function definition, or maybe you're looking at a paragraph in a document. Also, if you press Control L a third time, then it puts that line at the bottom of the screen so you see everything that comes before. So if you want to get a quick bird's eye view of the location that you're currently at, you can use Control L just to sort of cycle that around and take a look at it. I'll switch back to the init.el file because it's a little bit easier to look at. The init.el, there we go. Okay, so then Control Alt L executes the reposition window function or command, which will attempt to scroll the screen to fit as much of the current thing as possible in the window. So either that's the current paragraph or the current function definition, basically whatever is constituted as a paragraph, I think, in terms of the text. So if I put the cursor in this block here, I'll use Control Alt L, and then basically it tries to center that whole block in the screen. So what if I put it right here on this this function? So I put my cursor here toward the end of the screen on this function definition, Control Alt L, then it tries to put as much of this section basically on the screen as it can. So if you want to scroll the screen to be optimal for whatever it is you're currently looking at, Control Alt L will basically put you there. It looks like if you press it multiple times, it also does some extra behavior. So let's try this. I'm going to put my cursor once again here towards the end. Control Alt L one time, Control Alt L again. It doesn't seem to cycle like Control L does, but I think it just tries to progressively make the situation better if you press it multiple times, and then eventually it will stay in the same place. So you can basically just hold Control Alt and just press L a few times, and then it will put that whatever object that is in the screen for you in a better way. There's also some more documentation on recentering in the manual in case you want to learn a little bit more about the heuristics behind that. All right, so the last thing we're going to talk about is another way to easily move around in the buffer, but this time we're going to use text that we know exists in the buffer for movement. So if you know what you're looking for, you can search for that text in the buffer to move the point there very easily. There are two commands for that. There is a Control S, which executes the iSearchForward command, which basically sets up an interactive search for whatever you type next. So as you type letters for the search term, it will interactively search for those as you type. And then it's going to put the cursor after the occurrence, the next occurrence of whatever it is you typed. And then you can press enter to get back to writing in the file. So let's say I want to search for the word face. So face shows up here on these two lines. If I hit Control S, it's going to run the iSearchForward command. Then I can type F and then A, and then it puts the cursor right after this FA here. I can continue to type face if I want to, but I don't have to because it's already found that next occurrence. Then I can press return or enter to then finish the operation and put my cursor there. You can also do the same thing with the Control R binding, which basically goes backward from the current location of the point. So it runs the iSearch backward command, which prompts for the search term and does the interactive search like we mentioned, and it places the cursor before the occurrence found before the location where the point is currently in the buffer. So if I put my cursor here, and then let's say I type in the word org, maybe no, let's type in appear. So I'll do Control R for backward search. I'll type AP, and then it jumps here to appears. And then I can press enter, and my cursor is now at the beginning of the word appears. So that's also a very quick way to jump to anything that you see on the screen. Now, what if there's a lot of instances of the same thing that you're looking for on the screen? So there's a whole bunch of org here. If I put my cursor right here, Control S to go forward, type ORG. So we see that there's a lot of instances of org highlighted in this buffer. How do I get to those? Well, I just keep pressing Control S. So while you still have the search open, you can continue to press Control S to move to the next result that runs the iSearch repeat forward command. So basically it remembers what you've searched for, and now you're just basically moving forward in the buffer for every instance of that. So if you put your eyes on something on the screen, like let's say match here, you can just hit Control S, type in match, and then press enter, and your cursor is immediately there. So basically, you can find whatever it is you're looking at very easily using Control S. So it's not just for finding things just to know where they are. It's also for moving your cursor to that location. Let's see, what else? So like I mentioned, if you keep the prompt open, you can keep pressing Control S and Control R. That also works with both of the commands. So if I were to press Control S, type in org, if I press Control S a few times to move forward in the search results, I can then press Control R to move backward in the search results. So then that can go to the bottom of the buffer. It can go basically everywhere in the buffer, forward or backward. So that's also a very nice thing where you can easily move forward and back if you need to. If you are looking for all the instances of the usage of a particular word, it can allow you to cycle through your buffer very quickly to get a sense for what the usages are, and then you can go back to where you were before. These commands are also useful for even just jumping forward to a specific character on the same line. So if I wanted to jump to template here on the same line, I could press Control S T, Control S T. Maybe there's a lot of T's on this line, so I'd have to press Control S, Control S, Control S, and then press enter. But it's useful for being able to jump ahead to certain letters. If you're used to Vim key bindings, you probably know about the F command inside of the normal mode, where if you press F and then press another letter, it will jump ahead to that letter on the same line. So this gives you some of the same type of behavior as that. Okay, so that was all for the movement keys that I wanted to discuss today. Obviously, we haven't gotten into anything about editing or anything like that yet, but what I wanted to do is try to split up these videos a little bit so they don't get into a huge video all about key bindings, because you probably wouldn't be able to digest all of that in one sitting. So we're going to do a few different videos about these basic key bindings so that we can split it up a little bit and learn things a bit at a time. So in the next video, we're going to talk about the bindings for how you can select regions of text using Emacs mark commands. There's a lot here that you can do that you probably didn't know, so I want to focus a whole video on this because I think it's pretty useful. And then after that, we're going to continue covering the fundamental key bindings for editing and manipulating text. So after we are finished with movement and selection, then we can talk about all the things you can do for the actual process of editing. So I think that's going to also be pretty helpful. So I hope this video was helpful for you. Definitely leave a note in the comments if you have any questions or comments on the video. Also, definitely check out the link in the description to the Discord channel or Discord chat for System Crafters. A lot of people there talking about Emacs every day, so please join there if you have other questions about Emacs. And finally, I would like to say thank you to my sponsors. These people have decided to sponsor the work that I do making Emacs videos on this channel, and I'm very thankful to them for doing so. It just gives me this sense of, I know that people actually care enough about what I'm doing to help support the channel. So it's very meaningful to me, and it definitely keeps me going. So I really appreciate these people who decided to sponsor me. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, check out the links in the description below. I'm on both GitHub sponsors and Patreon. There's also a link to PayPal if you want to do one-time tips. And also, you can just help the channel by giving a like to the video, subscribing to the channel, and also telling your friends about the videos if you find them helpful. So please just just share with your friends and let them know about it. And maybe we'll have more people that want to talk about Emacs, which I think would be a lot of fun. All right, and so until next time, probably I'll do another video in the series next week. So you'll see another one very soon about this. So it won't be too long. Anyway, until next time, thanks a lot for watching. Happy hacking. Thanks a lot. Sorry, I can't speak anymore after the end of this video. I think I've said too many key bindings, so my brain's a little bit melted. Happy hacking. See ya.